Learn how to make Anna's travel cloak from the Frozen 2 movie with 2 skirts and some trim. Please like this video and follow my sewing channel. Hi, I'm Heather from Heather Handmade, and today I'm going to teach you how to make Anna's jacket, the jacket she wears over her travel dress. I am not going to make the cape from scratch. I'm actually going to be upcycling. So I found this kind of reddish purplish skirt. It is kind of a half circle skirt. It doesn't really matter what kind of skirt you have. I chose, this is a velvet, which is awesome because in the movie you can see that hers is probably like a wool or a felt, but I think that this velvet gives off the same vibe. I also found a magenta skirt that we're going to be using for the lining. This one is actually very textured, but you can just get a magenta one. It doesn't matter. We are going to be kind of deconstructing this to use it. This is a black button-up shirt I got to use for the dress, which I'm going to be doing a different tutorial for the dress, but I'm going to actually take off this collar stand. So this is the collar, the part on the top. The collar stand is the part that makes the collar stand up. I'm going to take that off and use that for the top of the cape. The last supplies you'll need are, this is black bias binding. It is just a 1/2 inch width and it's double fold. The last thing is I bought this gold chain to do when she has her cape on. There's a chain that holds it on right here on her neck. So I bought this gold chain. It's attached to some tulle, some black tulle. I'm not exactly how sure I'm going to use this, but I plan on doing it with Velcro, and we're going to figure it out as we work on it. The first thing you need to do is deconstruct the purple skirt. So right here I am undoing the whole hem. I want to be able to access that part, and this is actually a small hem, so it doesn't matter that much, but if it were a thicker hem, it would be important to remove it so I don't cut through the hem. Then I'm opening the sides and I'm removing the zipper. I'm essentially just deconstructing the skirt until it's just fabric with no seams. I even cut off the waistband so that I could lay out the skirt flat. Some of this trim went through one seam, so I left that seam in place, but the place where the trim went into seam, that was the seam that I opened up so I could make it flat. So here you can see this is kind of a half circle skirt, which is perfect for the cloak. Then take your black button-up shirt and remove the collar piece from the top. So I'm just seam ripping it off, and also you want to remove the collar stand. You are not going to use the collar, but you are going to be reusing the collar stand. So you have to remove the tags and the buttons and the collar, and basically take it all apart. But I left the seam at the two fronts. I left some of the seam in place so that it would be easy to sew it on later. Then what you're going to do is you're going to see how big your collar stand is compared to your skirt, and then I had to cut mine down a little bit so it would fit more with the collar stand, and I cut 2 sections off so that it was a little bit smaller, which works well because I'm making a size 5-6 for my daughter. And then I took my magenta skirt and I also deconstructed it. And I found with this one, because there was so much fabric and so much pleating and it was such a long skirt, that I just cut through everything. I cut through the seams, I cut through the waistband, I cut through those pleats, I cut the hem off. I just basically cut all the seams off so there was just fabric, one big piece, which is nice. And then I took my purple skirt, that is the curve of a cloak that I want, and I placed it on top of the magenta skirt. I would recommend doing wrong sides together. I didn't do that in this video. and then cut it out so that there's two of the same exact shapes of a curved like piece. Then you are going to place your two pieces wrong sides together and match up all of your corners and edges and make sure it's all smoothed into place. And you're going to pin all of the edges together, make sure that everything is lined up and smoothed. If there is a little bit of difference in, if something is a little bit longer than the other piece, then we can trim that later. But right now we are pinning it all together so that we can just baste around the edge and then all of the seams will be in place. So these pieces are basted together and they are not going to move. And I took some tailor's chalk and I drew a little oval. This is about the place, it's kind of 2/3 of the way down, and this is where the hole is for the arm to come through. So I drew an oval and I'm pinning the two layers together right at that oval. And what you're going to do is you're going to baste on that circle you drew on that oval. You're going to baste it together, and once it's basted together, the two layers, you're going to cut out the inside of that hole. So I'm cutting about 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch from that stitching line. You want it to be very close. The stitching line is just to keep the layers together, and this is the little hole that her arms go through in the cloak. So I'm going to use some black double fold 1/2 inch bias binding to finish the edge, and it's a little tricky to place it onto such a tight oval. I first went around and I pinned it carefully, and I pinned very close together. This is a good time to use pins or clips and have them very close together. So I pinned it all on, and then one tip when you're doing bias binding on like a sharp curve or something is you iron it before you sew it, and that helps that bias fabric kind of curve in the place you want it to, and it makes it a little easier to sew. You have less puckers and gathers or too much stretching. It just really helps it get the shape you want it to have. So do this to you're going to have two ovals, two sides, and when you get to the edge, fold it over 1/2 inch, and then it will finish that edge. So I have two of those holes for the hands, and then take the bias binding and you are going to place it on the center front of the cloak, so one on each side. I prefer to do mine in sections, so I just did one straight edge for the center front on both sides, and then I took bias binding and I finished the hem all the way around. I like to fold over one edge right where I start so that it's not a raw edge, and then I sewed it all the way around to finish the hem. So everything is finished and done except for the neckline, but this is a great time to add any of a black detail. My skirt already had some, but you can use the same bias binding and you can do circles or ovals or details like I did. You can do flowers, anything that you really want to do. You can add, and you can study the details in the movie to see what you want to do. Then you're going to take your collar stand and you are going to attach it to the skirt and pin it really carefully because the cloak is very thick and kind of heavy, so I had to pin it carefully to make it stay on, and my neckline was a little bit bigger after basting it, and so I added a tiny pleat in the back just to make the neckline the same size as the collar stand. But if you don't need a pleat, then you don't have to have a pleat. I just did that for a quick fix. And carefully pin it on. Use lots of pins and make sure all of that fabric is going to be sandwiched up inside of the collar stand. You don't want any raw fabric edges that will fray when you wash it. And that is the base of the cloak is done. You can leave it at this and just use the button on the collar stand as the way to put it on. But if you want to add one more detail, then I'm going to add the gold chain detail to the front. That's how Anna actually keeps her cloak on. And I bought this gold chain, and it has some netting, so I'm able to sew with it. I did have to use some metal cutters to cut through the metal, and then I just have a small piece. This is probably 8 to 12 inches. It depends on the size that you're making and how big and how drapey you want it to be. So since the netting is in the way, I'm folding it over so that you won't see it from the front, and I'm just hand basting it so it's going to be in the back. And I mean, I'm not doing any special stitch. I'm just kind of going back and forth and making sure that it's all in place. I also went through a couple pieces of the chain. I found that if it wasn't secured, then the chain could slide out of the little tunnel that it's in. And so I just grabbed a couple of, I had the thread go through a couple pieces of the metal to keep it in place and it wouldn't fall out. Tie your knot off so that it's all secure and you can cut your thread. Then cut 2 pieces of, you just want small pieces so that it will hide behind that chain. And Velcro is so much easier for little kids to use instead of a zipper or a button. So I am, one piece of the Velcro will go onto one side of the chain and I sew it on by hand, and then the other piece of Velcro will actually be sewn onto the cloak, and the side of the chain that doesn't have Velcro, I'm going to hand sew it onto the cloak. Oh, and I like that the chain is easy to take on and off with the Velcro, and the Velcro is such a small piece, it's not that hard to hand sew to keep it in place. And now your cloak is done. Anna's cloak that she wears to the Enchanted Forest. It's great for traveling. It's nice and warm, but it is great that you upcycled. It's so awesome to reuse materials because it makes it easy to put together. Thank you so much for watching this video. I can't wait to see the Anna dresses and cloaks that you make. Have a wonderful day.